thing is Santa. But as for me and Grandpa, we believe.
It is December 15th, 2021. This is the Daily Rob, and you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, BitChute, Rumble, Odyssey, and on all major podcast platforms. Now, without further ado, reporting from parts unknown, the one and only Rob Smith.
Stu, I'm on a secret mission. I'm on Dr. Evil's secret island about 200 yards from his lair. Let me paddle out into the harbor so we can talk. Okay? Can you give me just a second?
Yeah, I'll be quiet.
Okay. Stu, I'm back. Let me put this in my holster.
Okay.
I don't think they can hear me here. Boy, modern technology is unbelievable. Here I am in the South Pacific, and we're talking just like you're in the next room.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
I'll have to thank M for all the technology. Or is it Q?
Q.
Q, I mean Q, yeah.
Grow up, 007.
Anyway, Stu, some news. The producer price index is up. This is year over year. It was up to 9.6%. Let's round it off to 10%. It's the highest it's been maybe ever, which means in 2 or 3 months, consumer prices are going to be higher than they are now, certainly 9.6 or more. All I can say is this is something we have to watch. We're in a dangerous economy. And if you look at some of the prophetic words of the sage of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson, he warned about this. He said, he was speaking of kind of devaluation of the currency. He said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. He also said in referring to kind of the First Bank of the United States and manipulation of the currency, he said, banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. In other words, Stu, we bust our ass and spill our blood, and a bunch of dumb shits in Washington ruin the country through its devaluation of the currency. Now, Stu, I don't believe all of this inflation has to do with a lot of different things, and I'll talk about that at another time, but it's very disconcerting, Stu. Another story, Stu, is the Fifth Circuit of the United States overturned the lawless Biden administration again. If you remember back in August, there was a Supreme Court of the United States decision that said the president must abide by the Remain in Mexico policy, which means if you're wishing to have asylum, you got to stay on the other side of the border. They totally ignored that, Stu, and hundreds of thousands of people has since entered the country illegally. They come up with another excuse, and the court has shot them down again. They are lawless, Stu, lawless. And you know what has happened in previous time when a government is lawless and won't obey its own law. That's all I'm going to say, Stu. Speaking of lawlessness, Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee, which is nothing more than a gaslighting committee, you heard it here. There was an abundance, a plethora of election fraud on November 4th. Everybody knows that. It's not even disputed. But yet they want to gaslight all the people who went there to protest. And they want to claim it's somehow an insurrection. Still, you can't have an insurrection when there are no guns. I don't know whether you heard Merrick Garland. He testified and he would not state how many agent provocateurs of the federal government were in the crowd stirring things up. But anyway, now they're coming after Mark Meadows, who has filed a lawsuit stating executive privilege, and they want to criminalize him. Stu, this is like the Star Chamber. It's like the Stalin show trials. It's dangerous. Again, just avoiding the law to really hurt people and put them in jail, to silence them so nobody will ever find out what they did on November 4th. The other thing they're doing, Stu, is it's a big deflection mechanism, because we have this Build Back Better program, which the Wall Street Journal in an editorial yesterday stated that it is a huge, big con. Now, Stu, the manipulation of politicians of truth is astounding. You had Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, whatever, all say things like, it won't cost a nickel. Well, Stu, in the real world of credits and debits, anytime you spend something, it is a cost, okay? But in Washington speak, it doesn't cost anything if it doesn't increase the deficit. They don't know what they're doing from one day to the next, okay? They have no credibility on controlling spending at all. It's a $4.9 trillion bill, and that's what it's going to cost. And that's pretty much what the Wall Street Journal said. There's been another independent study, the Penn-Wharton budget model, which says it's going to cost $4.6 trillion. The CBO has said it's going to cost an amount of money that blows everything out of the water. All this January 6th stuff, Stu, is to get your attention off of this huge socialist bill. And one has to ask, Stu, how much of this is intentional? We know that these neo-Marxists want to destroy. Is inflation in their bailiwick? The January 6th committee stirring up trouble there, spending $4.9 trillion that we don't have. How much of all this is purposeful to hurt the country? I think it's a reasonable thing to ask, Stu. What do you think?
I mean, so much of this has just kind of become just a spending nightmare, where the solutions to what I see as the problems, we don't do. So instead of lifting all these mandates and having people go back to work and get the economy cranking again, we think we have to spend our way to a better future. And the spending is just illogical at times. Like why, like yesterday, why do we need to have electric car charging stations right now? Is that the most pressing problem facing us?
Well, if we needed them, the market would provide them, Stu.
And there are people like Elon Musk who have popularized electric cars, who I'm sure would do it 1,000 times better than the government.
They do it based on market realities too. Thanks, Stu, this is somewhat of a mental psychosis. These people have never done anything in their lives. They feel no fidelity to the country. They just want to spend money, and they don't care if it destroys the country. And I do think that many of them want to see the country destroyed. I really believe that. Stu, moving on, and I have to be careful with what I say, because what I'm about to say deals with the C word. And I'm not a doctor, Stu, but I'm just reporting what other people have stated who are doctors. Matter of fact, this is what the New York Times, a Kami Pinko paper, has reported on, is that the FDA new drug, Merck drug, Molnupiravir, it actually mutates healthy human DNA by accident and impacts male fertility. Well, Stu, I plan on spending my seed and having lots more Smiths, okay? I ain't taking this drug, all right? I figure that's my duty, Stu, to populate the world with more Mensa candidates, secret agent types like myself.
The Smiths need to conquer the earth.
Yes, indeed.
That's what it says in the Bible, right? Go forth
in
and
the Bible,
multiply.
And we've taken down the Johnsons and the Joneses. They're mere chumps, Stu. Speaking of another C word story, there's a noted cardiologist who is sounding the alarm. His name is Peter McCullough. He's written 650 peer-reviewed articles on medical issues, many dealing with cardiac issues. And he says that the FDA, of course, is downplaying the myocarditis phenomenon in the sense that there's an extraordinary number. He says there's going to be an extraordinary number of young people who will end up with permanent heart damage. And he cites some pretty interesting statistics too. He says in a normal year, there are about 640 cases of myocarditis. He says already in about 6 months, and this is before all of the VACCINESs have been fully implemented, VAERS has reported 11,000 cases. And he says VAERS obviously underreports by many multiples. He goes on to say that if these children who have been VAXED between 12 and 17 years old, and this doesn't even count the ones between 5 and 12, are actually more likely to be hospitalized with myocarditis than COVID itself. As a matter of fact, the likelihood of being hospitalized with COVID is almost zero. But it's 86% if they develop the myocarditis stemming from the VACCINE. He goes on to say that if these levels continue, there will be a massive amount of people with heart conditions. And he says that we are talking about heart failure, the need for heart failure medication, risk of cardiac death, and some children going all the way to heart transplants. He also mentioned, and this is probably the most important thing, your kid, you get COVID, big deal, you get over it. You get myocarditis and it's permanent heart damage. I heard on the radio today, Stu, when I was driving around, the drug companies now have a pill for the Omicron virus. We didn't even know what that was until about 10 days ago. All right. Now, I'm all for if drug companies come up with something that's been around for a long time, like the I word and the H word. Those substances have worked for lots of different things, and doctors say, well, you know, it also works remarkably well for the C word. But coming up with a new drug out of nowhere seems to me, Stu, that unless it has substances that have been around for a long time and there have been lots of studies on, I would be very apprehensive about that, especially in light of how wrong they have all been over the past year and a half. It's almost as though if they say something, then you can bet that the real truth is 180 degrees from what they state. When I use the word they, I mean the cabal between the GOVT and the PHARMA companies and the media. Other than that, Stu, I think that's about all I have. I thought I had one other little story. Oh, one little thing is it's Christmas time, Stu, and so many people just want to find something to complain about. There's a group that goes out and they put wreaths on veterans' graves in military cemeteries. And there is a group called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, which is kind of a misnomer name, and they're complaining about it. They say wreaths are a Christian symbol And therefore, this group is doing great harm to people who aren't Christians. I don't see it that way, Stu. What do you say?
I've never associated it with Christianity. I imagine it probably has roots in pagan Europe.
That's what I'm thinking.
I mean,
It's
look at
seasonal.
look at the laurel wreath. That was a Olympic.
Roman. Yeah.
So
But anyway, again, I get back to our country so wealthy today. People, they don't have to worry about eating and paying bills as much. So they've got more time just to bitch about things.
1000%. And then just to kind of touch back on what you're saying about these new medications, Remdesivir is still kind of, I think even though that has decided, they linked that with a higher increase of acute kidney failure, that's still something that you can officially say is it's okay to give people according to the YouTube standards. But other medications that might begin with certain letters of the alphabet, that might be vowels like A-E-I-O-U, you can't even talk about on YouTube. So it's very interesting how so heavy-handed the policy of what can and cannot be talked about is, that there are these things that just go through the cracks. Like you can find Fauci on YouTube saying, don't wear a mask.
Dr. Fauci, coronavirus, of course, has been in the news so much. People are worried. Should they be worried? Are they worried unnecessarily? And what should they be doing?
No, I don't think people should be frightened. I mean, the risk right now, today, currently, is really relatively low for the American public. So right now, don't worry about it. Be more concerned about influenza, which is going into a second peak for the season. People wearing masks now is just not relevant. You don't need to be walking around with a mask right now. Masks, quite frankly, are more important for people who are infected to prevent them from infecting someone else.
And hopefully they would get a better mask than the drugstore sells?
Right. The drugstore masks that sell have a lot of loopholes in them that let the virus through.
And that's coming from Mr. Fauci himself. So it's just a bizarro world we live in, and the censorship is unending. So should I let you go figure out and save the world and get rid of Dr. Evil?
I think so, Stu. I'm gonna paddle back ashore and sneak into his lair now. Hopefully by 9 o'clock tonight, he'll be floating around in a space capsule in outer space, and the world will be safe.
Hell yeah. Well,
Okay, Stu.
for king and country.
Go get him.
See ya.
Dr. Evil, it's about the sharks. When you were frozen, they were put on the endangered species list. We tried to get some, but it would have taken months to clear up the red tape.